Henderson is a veteran prosecutor and executive director of San Francisco's Department of Police Accountability. Simone Sanders Townsend was chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris, and now the host of Simone on MSNBC. Simone, somebody makes a simple mistake. I've done all of those things, gotten in the wrong car, had to turn around in somebody's driveway, and get shot. What's going on here, do you think?
I really don't know, Chris, and I think I've definitely viscerally connected with the words of the congressman, disturbed by how easy it is to turn to violence against one another. I think particularly in the case in Kansas City of the young man who was just trying to go and pick up his brothers, that is a case where the suspect himself said he peeked out of the window, and in the witness statement that the police took from him said that after he saw a black man, he opened the door, and we know what happened. I think in the other cases that we've discussed, the case in New York, the case in Texas, it does not make sense. I think people are on edge. I think people are scared, but I also think that folks who feel who are exhibiting this feeling should not be folks who are wielding guns in their possession at any given moment. And so I think it is a prime time to continue the conversation about background checks and gun safety legislation, so that things like this are not commonplace in America as they are right now.
And I want to speak more with you about that, but Paul, let's talk about some of the legal parts of this. I mentioned the suspect in New York, Kevin Monahan, is supposed to be in court this hour. We got some clues as to a possible defense from his attorney, who said that Monahan didn't intend to hurt anyone, that he blamed the incident on what he said, quote, was a series of errors. He said his client felt menaced. Now, here's what the sheriff said about that.
Going up the wrong driveway by mistake is certainly not grounds in New York anyways to be shot at. They were in the process of leaving, which makes his case obviously a little different. And I don't know how you could menace someone if you're leaving the property.
Paul is simply saying, I felt afraid. I was scared for my life, a defense.
Absolutely not, because what this raises is all of the legal issues surrounding the stand your ground laws. And, we have those in 38 different states. And before we start addressing the race disparate outcomes of those laws, we really need to look at, specifically in this case, what the legal standards are, both for charging the case and what the legal standards are for trying to defend the case. And so what he's alluding to in those statements, the defendant there, was how he is allowed, with stand your ground, to respond to a threat. But here's the issue. The legal issue turns on two specific issues of what the reasonableness is of the threat and what the reasonableness is of using lethal force. And in both of those standards, I think you're going to fail in all three of these cases. And so that's the real legal issue that's going to be unpacked in the case ahead when we hear the testimony. But that's what we should be listening for: the reasonableness of the threat, which did not exist when there's a mistake, not a threat, and the reasonableness of using lethal force to respond versus telling someone, go away, or even inquiring as to what they're doing there. And again, all of this gets overshadowed by race disparate outcomes when we're interpreting how guns get used and how violence is invoked upon specific communities in this country. But it really challenges those two issues.
It leads me directly to what we just heard from Maggie Vespa, which is that the family of Ralph Yarl, because there won't be any hate-related charges locally, they're looking for the feds to take a look at this. What would that look like? How would that change things?
Well, it changes things because it's not a double jeopardy if the feds come in and charge at a hate crime level. And to the degree the state prosecution is evaluating what gives them the stronger sentence, they're allowed to do that. The feds can still come in and do an evaluation of hate crimes, but what that does is it shifts the burden for federal prosecutors to have to prove intent. And that's the key issue in proving hate law crimes. So to prove a hate law crime, you have to show that the intent was in part to address issues from the defendant beyond just the act of violence in and of itself. And that's not a problem here. I would love to see that type of approach. Also, to address some of the things we talked before about race disparate outcomes in these kind of cases, that the federal government and the Biden-Harris administration taking a lead in addressing not just gun violence, but the implication of gun violence on disenfranchised communities. I think it would be a great step, and
And Simone, you know, because you were a part of the Biden-Harris administration, very specifically, do we still have Simone? Okay, I heard that in my ear. So let me ask you this, Paul. She was talking about the fact that this raises the stakes, right? This raises the stakes in an administration that has fought really hard, had some progress, but by the president's own admission, hasn't gotten far enough. You've had 2 members of Congress shot in recent years. Didn't change anything, really. Didn't change anything when children in Newtown got shot. I don't know. You're around this in your everyday job. Is everyday people making a simple mistake and yet getting shot maybe bring this to a different level? I don't know. What's your gut tell you?
My gut tells me that maybe we're approaching a tipping point. We're seeing more and more action addressing gun laws, and this may be the moment that the community collectively leans in and says it's reasonable for us to have gun laws and restrictions. It's reasonable to challenge how stand your ground gets interpreted and have limitations that give us a race-neutral outcome, because I think that's important. I do think that we're starting to see more action. We saw the Biden-Harris administration take a stand in March talking about access to gun and gun background checks. I think those are really reasonable. Let's see how much leeway they get and how much support they get in doing these type of approaches. I will point out one of the things that seems really interesting in this case in particular with the Biden-Harris administration and the potential for the feds to get involved from the Department of Justice. You know, I was Kamala Harris's chief before while she was a prosecutor, and she put me in charge of hate crimes. So I know there's a deep familiarity from the administration on how to proceed with these cases. I'd like to see that evaluation be a part of prosecutions that take place when we're addressing gun control laws and gun shootings in this country. And so I'm looking forward to that evaluation and looking forward to the next steps beyond just the criminal accountability from the cases that we've just been discussing this morning.
So, Simone, we were talking about the Biden-Harris administration and their efforts to try to get forward some gun legislation, some common sense gun legislation. And I'll ask you the question again, which is simply, we haven't made a lot of progress when members of Congress have gotten shot, when little kids have gotten shot. Now we're seeing this series of people getting shot for doing pretty much nothing but making a mistake. Every single one of us has probably made at one time or another. And I hate to look at this as an opportunity, but is there something here that the Biden-Harris administration can message? Is there something here? We know that the president, for example, called Ralph Yarl and they had a long conversation. We know how he feels about this. Is there something to take from this in terms of moving the ball forward even a little?
Look, I think so, Chris. The reality is, and we were speaking about the stand your ground laws a moment ago. The stand your ground laws come from state legislatures across the country, right? That is how those laws are put in place on the books in states from Florida to Missouri and many places in between. State legislators are the people that introduce and pass those bills. I think that the White House has done as much as they could, particularly on the issue of gun reform. After the shooting at Covenant School, I remember seeing the president on a tarmac, and he was asked particularly about, well, what can he do now? And if you read the transcript, it sounded kind of flippant. He said, I've done all I could. I watched the video, and he looked exacerbated. He has done all that he can do himself from the executive. Congress, governors, state legislators have to step up. I look at the governor of Tennessee. After the Covenant School shooting, after the international outcry, after the people in the state of Tennessee would not take no for an answer, kept the pressure on, after the governor's own wife's best friend lost her life in that Covenant School shooting, he came out and signed an executive order on background checks and called on the state legislature to pass red flag laws as it relates to gun purchases. I think that is what it's going to take, unfortunately, the voices of people not letting up. And to those students, those young people in Kansas City who walked out to stand with their friend, their classmate, Ralph Yarl, those young people, they understood the assignment. There are adults who literally have not gotten it together yet, but these young people, they understand, and it's those young folks who are going to help make the difference.
Paul Henderson, thank you. Simone, you're going to stay with us. Right now, Ron DeSantis is trying to turn his week